10 years ago, a man vanished the night before his own wedding and told no one why. Tonight, he's back, and he's sitting one seat away from the bride who never happened. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. Everyone calls me Nora, except for one man who used to say my full name slowly, like it was something breakable. I hadn't heard him say it in 10 years. I didn't expect to hear it tonight. I want to tell you about the night I found out that the man I love most in this world didn't leave me. He was paid to. But first, I have to tell you about the place guard. The fog came in off Highway 1, the way it always did in late September, rolling low across the vineyard rows until the whole Sonoma coastline looked like it was holding its breath. I remember thinking, standing at the edge of my sister's engagement party, with a glass of untouched champagne sweating in my hand, that the estate had never looked more beautiful, and that I had never wanted to be anywhere less. The Whitfield family had been coming to this stretch of coast near Bodega Bay for 3 generations. My grandfather used to say the cypress trees planted along the cliff line had been bent sideways by the wind for so long they'd forgotten how to stand straight, and that people from here ended up the same way, permanently shaped by whatever storm got to them first. I hadn't been back in 4 years. I told myself it was because of work, because of distance, because Los Angeles was easier than facing a town where every restaurant hostess still remembered my mother's name. That was a lie I'd gotten very good at telling. The real reason was Josie. My sister was radiant that night, in the way brides-to-be are supposed to be radiant. Golden and terrified, and glowing under the string lights strung between the eucalyptus trees, laughing too loud at things that weren't especially funny, gripping her fiancé's hand like he was the only fixed point in a spinning room. I loved her. I want that understood before anything else. Whatever this story becomes, whatever I learned before the night was over, I need you to know that I loved my sister enough to smile at that party, even while something in my chest was quietly breaking. I found my seat by the water feature at the family table, third from the head. There was a small card in elegant calligraphy with my name on it. Beside it, another card, a name I hadn't let myself read out loud in a decade. Dimitri Drakos. My hand went cold before my mind caught up to why. I want to be honest about who Demitri was to me, because if I soften it, none of what happened later will make sense. He was 26 the last time I saw him, standing in the doorway of the apartment we shared, above his family's taverna, 2 streets back from the harbor. A squat, warm little building that smelt permanently of oregano and lemon and wood smoke that his parents had built from nothing after they came over from Thessaloniki with 2 suitcases and a recipe box. I was 25. We were supposed to be married the following afternoon in the same vineyard where Josie's engagement party was now being held, under an arch of the same white roses my mother had grown for 30 years. Demitri did not show up to that wedding. He did not call. He did not leave a note. For 6 months I checked hospitals. I checked the county coroner's office quietly, without telling my mother. Then I stopped checking, because there is only so long a person can stand at the edge of that particular cliff before they have to either jump or walk away from the view entirely. I walked away. I built a life in Los Angeles, and that had no room in it for a man who could disappear that completely. And for 10 years, I believed the story I had told myself, that he panicked, that he was never the kind of man who could survive being loved that hard, that some men simply run. I did not believe, not for 1 second, that my sister had anything to do with it. I didn't have any reason to, not yet. There is a kind of grief that never quite finishes grieving, because it's never given an ending. A death has a date. A death has a funeral, a stone, a body to bury. What I had instead was an empty side of a closet, a florist's deposit I never asked to have refunded, and a silence that simply never broke. For years I dreamed variations of the same night. Dimitri at the door of our apartment above the Taverna, saying something, anything, before he walked out of it. In every version, I woke up before I heard the words. I built armor out of that silence. I became, by 28, the kind of woman colleagues describe as unshakable. The one who took the calls nobody wanted to take, who negotiated without blinking, who never let anyone close enough to leave a mark like that again. I told myself it was strength. Looking back on it now, from the other side of that terrible, beautiful night, I think it was mostly just very well organized fear. He looked older, obviously. 10 years does that. But it wasn't the grey threading through his dark hair, or the lines fanning out from eyes that used to only crease when he laughed, that struck me first. It was how still he went when he saw me. The particular, total stillness of a man who has spent a decade rehearsing this exact moment and still isn't ready for it. Eleanor, he said, just that. My full name, the way only he ever said it, low and unhurried, like he was setting something fragile down on a table between us. Up close, he still smelled faintly of cedar and the sea, the way he always had, though I couldn't have told you if that was cologne or memory playing tricks on a body that hadn't forgotten him nearly as thoroughly as I'd told myself it had. He was wearing a dark grey suit that fit him the way nothing had fit him a decade ago, when he was still a young man, running his parents' taverna on borrowed time and borrowed money, dreaming out loud about the restaurant he'd build someday, with his own name over the door. I wondered, absurdly, whether he ever built it. I wonder why, of all the things I could have thought in that moment, that was the one that rose to the surface first. Dimitri. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Small mercies. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't either, he said, until 3 weeks ago. There was a version of this moment I should have walked away, where the woman I'd become in Los Angeles, the one with the corner office and the noise-cancelling headphones and the carefully constructed life with no room in it for old grief, should have made an excuse about the bar or the bathroom or literally anything, and put 100 feet of vineyard between us before either of us said something we couldn't take back. Instead, I sat down. How do you know Marcus? I asked, meaning Josie's fiancé, because it was the only safe question I had. Something moved behind his eyes. Something careful. I don't really, he said. Josie invited me. I laughed because it was absurd. Because for one merciful second, I thought he was joking. Josie invited you. Personally, he said. Handwritten card. Arrived 3 weeks ago, out of nowhere, after 10 years of nothing. He turned his wine glass slowly by the stem, not drinking from it. the way he used to do back at the Taverna when he was working up to say something he didn't want to say. I almost didn't come. I've spent 10 years telling myself I wasn't going to come back to this town and put you through seeing me again. But I read that card about 11 times, Nora, and something about it felt like he stopped himself. Like what? Like an apology that wasn't hers to give. He said quietly. I still don't know why I came. I think some part of me needed to see your face when I said I was sorry. Even if I couldn't tell you what for. I want you to understand that at this point in the evening, I still thought this was a story about heartbreak, about a man who lost his nerve once and had spent a decade regretting it, showing up now because guilt and champagne make people brave. I did not yet understand that I was sitting at a table set quite deliberately by my own sister, that the woman glowing under the string lights 40 feet away, laughing at her fiancé's toast, had spent 3 weeks and God knew how much careful thought arranging exactly this collision. I did not yet understand that some fires are lit on purpose and left to look like an accident. Marcus stood to give the first toast of the night not long after, tapping his glass with a fork until the whole party quieted under the string lights and the thickening fog. He said the kind of things men say at their own engagement parties, that he'd never believed in luck until Josie, that some people spend their whole lives waiting for a home to walk into, and he'd found his. Everyone laughed in the right places. Everyone drank. I wasn't looking at Marcus. I was looking at my sister's face as she watched him. That particular brightness she wore like armor. The one she'd worn at every family gathering for the last 10 years. The one I had never once, not a single time, thought to question. Beside me, Dimitri had gone very quiet. I felt him look at Josie too, just for a moment, and something crossed his face that I didn't have a name for yet. Not longing, not resentment, something closer to recognition. The look of a man watching someone perform a scene he'd once been cut out of, and finally understanding, for the first time in 10 years, exactly why. Demitri, I kept my voice low under the noise of the toast. What are you telling me? He turned to look at me, and for one unguarded second, I saw exactly how much it was costing him to sit there and say nothing. Not here, he said. Not tonight. There are things I need to tell you, Nora. And I need you to still be standing there when I do. Marcus raised his glass. The whole party raised theirs. I raised mine too, my hand steadier than it had any right to be, and drank to my sister's happiness without knowing yet that I was about to spend the rest of the night learning the true cost of my own. He said there were things he needed to tell me. He said he needed me still standing there when he did. I didn't know yet that the ground beneath that vineyard had been shifting under my feet for 10 years, and that by the time the last course was cleared, I would understand my entire life as a story someone else had been quietly rewriting without me. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. This is the part where the toast ends and the truth begins to surface, slow and cold, like something rising out of dark water. Dinner service began not long after Marcus's toast. Waitstaff moving between the long farmhouse tables with plates of seared halibut and roasted fennel, candlelight flickering against crystal glasses as the fog thickened over the cliffs beyond the estate's gardens. My mother, 3 seats down, was telling a story about Josie as a child that I'd heard 100 times before, and I found myself nodding at the right moments without absorbing a single word of it. Dimitri sat beside me in a silence that had weight to it. The particular density of a man choosing again and again not to speak. I studied him in the candlelight, the way you study something you're afraid might disappear if you look too directly at it. He'd cut his hair shorter than he used to wear it, though a few dark strands still fell forward the way they always had. And there was a faint white scar along his jaw that hadn't been there 10 years ago. A small violence I had no memory of and no right to ask about. Not yet. Not with so much larger silence still standing unbroken between us. His hands, when they weren't turning the wine glass, rested flat against the white tablecloth, like he was bracing himself against something only he could feel coming. Around us, the party moved through its rhythms. A cousin refilling glasses, someone's toddler being carried, protesting, toward the restrooms. My Aunt Carol asking Josie for the third time that evening to see the ring again, as though its existence might have changed since the last viewing. I watched Josie extend her hand, watched her laugh at exactly the pitch a room expects from a happy woman, and felt something in my chest tighten that I didn't yet have a name for. You don't have to eat if you're not hungry, I said finally, mostly to fill the space, mostly because the alternative was looking at him and asking the question sitting behind my teeth. I'm not, he admitted. Hungry, I mean. He turned his wine glass by the stem again. That old habit. Watching the candlelight catch and slide across the surface of the wine. I keep thinking about the last dinner we had together. Do you remember it? I did. Of course I did. It was the night before the wedding that never happened. A quiet dinner at the taverna after hours. His mother insisting on cooking for us one last time as an unmarried couple. Candles burning low in old wine bottles. Dimitri reaching across the table to take my hand and telling me that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever life threw at us after, he wanted me to know he'd never loved anything the way he loved the sound of my laugh in that kitchen. 12 hours later, he was gone. I remember, I said carefully. I think about that dinner more than I think about anything else from that year, he said, because it's the last night I knew exactly who I was. After that, he stopped, jaw working, and looked out toward the dark line of the ocean past the garden wall. After that, I became someone I didn't recognize. Someone I'm still not sure I've forgiven. Dimitri, I set my fork down. My hands had gone unsteady again, the way they had at the sight of the place card. Just tell me, whatever it is. I've spent 10 years imagining 100 different reasons you left, and every single one of them has been worse than whatever you're about to say. He looked at me then, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen since the very first months we were together. A rawness, unguarded, like a man standing at the edge of a decision he'd already made 100 times in his head, and was only now brave enough to make out loud. Not here, he said again, quieter this time. Please, not at this table. Not with your whole family 20 feet away. Walk with me. There's a path down to the water. I saw it when I arrived. Give me until we reach the shore, and I'll tell you everything. I promise you that. I looked at Josie, laughing at the head table, her hand resting on Marcus's arm, that same bright armor she'd worn for a decade without my once questioning what it was covering. Okay, I said, take me to the water. The path down from the estate cut through a stand of wind-bent cypress before opening onto a narrow wooden staircase built into the cliffside, switchbacking down toward a crescent of dark sand and tide pools scattered with kelp and broken shell. The party noise faded behind us with each step. String quartet, laughter, the particular clatter of 100 people being happy together, until there was only the sound of the surf and the wind moving through the cypress, and beneath both of those, the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my ears. The night had turned properly dark by the time we reached the tree line, the kind of thick coastal dark that swallows the edges of things, and somewhere above us a barn owl called once, low and questioning, before going silent. I thought absurdly of all the nights Dimitri and I had walked home from the taverna together after closing. How he used to name the constellations for me, badly, inventing half of them, laughing when I called him on it. How I had believed, with the total unguarded certainty of a woman 25 years old and desperately in love, that we had the rest of our lives to get all of it right. Dimitri walked half a step ahead of me on the narrow stairs, one hand extended back without looking, an old reflex from 10 years ago that neither of us commented on. I took it. His palm was warm and rough in the same places it had always been rough, calloused from years behind a kitchen line, and for one disorienting second, the decade between us folded up like a piece of paper, and it was simply us again, walking down toward water in the dark, the way we used to after closing the taverna, tired and young, and certain of each other in a way I hadn't been certain of anything since. We reached the sand. The tide was low, exposing a wide stretch of tide pools that caught the last silver light off the water, and somewhere out past the breakers, a foghorn sounded low and mournful from the direction of the Russian river mouth. Demitri stopped at the edge of the driest sand, far enough from the water that the spray couldn't reach us, and let go of my hand. I need to start further back than you're expecting, he said. Before that night, before the wedding even, Okay. You remember my parents' restaurant was struggling that year. Bad season, bad loan terms. My father's health starting to go. I never told you how bad it actually was, because I didn't want you carrying that weight into a marriage. I thought I was protecting you. He laughed, short and humorless. The sound swallowed almost immediately by the wind. I've had 10 years to understand how wrong that instinct was. Dimitri, what does the restaurant have to do with everything? He said. It has everything to do with it, because 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a phone call. A woman offering to pay off my father's entire loan. Every cent gone. My parents' restaurant saved outright, in exchange for one condition. He said it plainly, almost gently. The way you'd deliver news you'd already grieved 1,000 times alone, and had no strength left to dramatize. I remember thinking, even in that first cold rush of understanding, how strange it was that the worst sentence of my life would be spoken so quietly, against the sound of surf, by a man whose voice I had once fallen asleep to nearly every night of my early 20s. The wind off the water had gone very cold, or maybe that was just my blood. What condition? He turned to face me fully then, and in the low grey light, I watched 10 years of silence gather itself into a single sentence. That I disappear before the wedding, he said. That I leave you at the altar without explanation, and never contact you again. No goodbye. No reason. Just gone. In a way cruel enough that you would never come looking, and clean enough that you would eventually let go and move on with your life. I heard the surf. I heard the foghorn, distant and patient. I did not, for several long seconds, hear anything Demitri said next, because my mind had gone entirely still around one word. Who? I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Who offered you that? He held my gaze, and I watched something in him break open. The particular grief of a man finally setting down a weight he'd carried alone for a decade, even knowing what setting it down would cost him. Nora, he said very gently, the way you'd say something to someone standing near a ledge. It was Josie. For a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. The tide moved in and out over the rocks below us, patient and indifferent, the way it had moved for 1,000 years before either of us existed, and would move for 1,000 more after we were gone. And I remember thinking, with a strange, floating clarity, that it was almost funny how the ocean simply continued, utterly unmoved, while an entire decade of my life quietly rearranged itself into a different shape. I want to tell you that I didn't believe him. I want to tell you that some part of me, loyal and stubborn, rose up immediately to defend my sister. The girl who braided my hair before school dances, who cried harder than I had at our grandmother's funeral, who'd called me every single week for 10 straight years, checking in, being there, being good. But the terrible thing about the truth, when it finally arrives after a decade of waiting, is that it doesn't announce itself as new information. It arrives instead like something you already knew, filed away somewhere you had refused to look. And every strange silence, every carefully changed subject, every time Josie had gently steered conversation away from Dimitri's name over the last 10 years, suddenly rearranged itself into a pattern I'd simply never let myself see. I thought of the year after the wedding that never happened. When Josie had shown up at my Los Angeles apartment unannounced with takeout and a bottle of wine, sitting with me on the floor of my half-unpacked living room, while I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in front of anyone else. I had thought at the time that it was the purest kindness I'd ever been shown. My little sister dropping everything, driving 3 hours on a Tuesday night because she couldn't stand the thought of me hurting alone. I understood now, standing on the dark beach with the truth finally spoken aloud, that she had not been comforting me that night. She had been keeping watch over the wound she'd made, making certain it healed the way she needed it to. She was 23, Dimitri said, when I still hadn't spoken. You were about to marry the man you loved and move 3 hours away to start your life. And she was terrified, genuinely, desperately terrified of losing the only family she had left that actually showed up for her. Your father was already gone by then. Your mother was. He stopped himself, chose his next words with visible care. Your mother wasn't always easy for either of you. Josie has told me since that she convinced herself she was protecting something. That if I truly loved you, I'd disappear cleanly rather than let you split your loyalty between a husband and a sister who needed you. She told herself a story where she was the one making the noble sacrifice. She was 23 and terrified, and she made a choice that broke both our lives to keep from feeling alone in hers. You've known this for 10 years, I said. The words came out flat, strange, like they belonged to someone else. You've known this whole time, and you let me believe you just stopped loving me. You let me spend a decade thinking I wasn't enough to stay for. I know. His voice cracked on the second word. I know what I let you believe, and I will spend whatever time you allow me trying to make that right. But you have to understand, the money wasn't the only condition. She made it very clear, very specifically, that if I ever told you the truth, she would make sure my parents lost the restaurant anyway. Through the bank connections her fiancé's family had even back then. I was 26, Nora. My father was dying by inches in a hospital bed we couldn't afford. I made a choice I have hated myself for every single day since. And I told myself the version where I was protecting the people I loved, instead of the version where I was a coward and let the woman I was supposed to marry believe I simply didn't want her anymore. The tide pools around us had gone black with the fading light, catching only thin slivers of star and cloud. I found I was crying, though I couldn't have said when it started. A cold, silent kind of crying, more shock than grief, though I understood the grief was coming, was already on its way toward me like weather. Why now? I finally asked. 10 years of silence, and you choose tonight, her engagement party, to finally tell me. Dimitri exhaled, long and unsteady, and looked back up toward the lights of the estate, glowing faintly through the fog above the cliffs. Because 3 weeks ago, he said, I finally understood why she invited me here at all. And once I understood that, Nora, I couldn't let this night end without you knowing the truth before she got the chance to bury it again. I stood very still, listening to the surf pull back over the rocks. That long, hissing retreat that always sounds to me like the ocean changing its mind. 10 years I had carried a a story about myself. That I was a woman who had loved a man so completely he'd had no choice but to run from it. That there was something in me too much, too heavy, too demanding to be stayed for. I had built an entire adult life around the architecture of that wound. I had chosen apartments and jobs and even the handful of relationships I'd allowed myself since, all filtered through a quiet, private conviction that I was someone people eventually left. And now, standing on a beach in the dark, I understood that the wound had never been mine to carry in the first place. It had been built for me, brick by careful brick, by the one person I had never once thought to suspect. What do you mean? Something cold moved through me that had nothing to do with the wind. What haven't you told me yet? He looked at me for a long moment, and in his face I saw the same stillness I'd seen across the dinner table hours ago. A man standing at the edge of one truth, about to step into a colder one. I don't think she invited me here to make amends, he said quietly. I think she invited me here because Marcus's family found out about the money, about what she did 10 years ago. And I think tonight, in front of everyone she loves, Josie is about to lose a great deal more than an old secret. Unless she finds a way to control exactly how and when and to whom the truth finally comes out. I felt the shape of it before I fully understood it. The careful, handwritten invitation arriving out of nowhere after 10 years of silence. The seating chart placing us close enough to talk, but far enough for the family table to be quiet about it. The timing of it all landing on the one night when every important person in both our lives would already be gathered in one place. Josie had not invited Dimitri out of guilt. or nostalgia, or even cruelty. She had invited him here because she needed a controlled explosion instead of an uncontrolled one. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, my sister had understood that the truth was coming for her one way or another, and had decided in the same quiet, careful way she did everything, that she would rather be the one holding the match. She's not confessing to me, I said slowly, the pieces cold and sharp in my hands. She's staging it. She wants it to look like an accident, like something that just happened to surface tonight, instead of something she orchestrated from the very beginning. I think so, Dimitri said. I think she spent 3 weeks building a version of tonight, where she gets to look like the victim of bad timing, instead of the architect of 10 years of silence. And I couldn't stand at that table and let her do that to you, without at least giving you the truth first, on your own terms, before she has the chance to control it. Above us, faint and carried on the wind, I heard the sound of another glass being tapped for another toast. Laughter rising up into the darkening sky. My sister's whole beautiful, borrowed life still glowing warm and unbroken in the lights behind us. For a few minutes longer, at least, before I climbed back up that cliffside and changed it forever.